As a reminder, all participant lines will be in the listen-only mode, and there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions after the presentation concludes. Should you need assistance during the conference, please signal an operator by pressing star, then 0 on your touchtone telephone. Please note that this conference is being recorded. I now hand the conference over to Mr. Praveen Sahai from Edelweiss Financial. Thank you, and over to you, sir.
Thank you, Melissa. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining to the earnings call of Metropolis Healthcare. On behalf of Edelweiss, I would like to welcome management team of Metropolis to discuss the result and outlook. We have with us Ms. Ameera Shah, Managing Director, Mr. Viren Singh, CEO, and Mr. Rakesh Agrawal, CFO. I would now request Ms. Shah for her opening remarks, post which we can open the floor for Q&A. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the Q1 FY22 earnings call. I hope you and everyone around you is safe and healthy, and I'm joined today by Vijinder, Rakesh, and SGA. The presentation and press release have been issued to the stock exchanges and uploaded on our company's website. I hope everyone's had an opportunity to go through the same. Let me first start by thanking each and every frontline worker, including those at Metropolis, who have selflessly worked around the clock during these past few months to get us past the deadlier second wave of COVID-19. Let me share with you the business highlights for the quarter. I'm very pleased to share that we've continued from last quarter and delivered highest ever quarterly revenue, EBITDA and PAT during Q1 FY22. We crossed 300 crores quarterly revenue to the 100 crores EBITDA milestone in this quarter. We also recorded highest ever patient visits at 3.5 million and number of tests at 6.5 million. Strong Q1 performance was partly led by increased COVID revenue due to second wave of COVID-19, which was bigger in magnitude. Accordingly, the COVID PCR test contributed 19% to the total revenue in Q1 as compared to 14% in Q4. Majority of the COVID revenues were recorded in the month of April, which tapered down in the month of May and June as cases started moderating. This was specifically in the west of India, where the COVID wave started in March and ended in April, while in the north of India, it started in April and completed in May, which is why we see, at least in West India, for Metropolis, the COVID revenue split between the two quarters of Q4 2021 and Q1 21-22. Reviewing both quarters together will provide a more balanced insight into performance of diagnostic firms. If one were to look at the performance of last two quarters, Q4 and Q1, Metropolis has fared well on profitability metrics as compared to the industry. However, this time around, the non-COVID business was not impacted to the extent it was impacted during the first wave of COVID-19 as people continue to undertake non-COVID tests with adequate precautions. Non-COVID revenues thereby grew 259% on a year-on-year basis and 5% on quarter-on-quarter basis. COVID or non-COVID, we have seen a strong acceptance to brand Metropolis, which is visible in our growth on all accounts, including patient visits. Even in non-core geographies, we have seen faster growth, and North and East India now contribute 4% extra to total revenue compared to last year, same period. And therefore, we strongly believe that we'll continue to move ahead and clock better than industry growth in quarters ahead. I'm also happy to share that we've settled the arbitration case with respect to receivables related to Global Hospital, which is now part of the IHH group. We had conservatively written off the dues in Q4 FY20 and have now written back 16 crores after receipt of the said money, which is reflected as exceptional gain in the P&L statement. Accordingly, we have restarted the business with Global Hospital and other hospitals in the IHH group as well. We have signed with them a multi-year contract which will start giving us revenues from September. Further, there was an arbitration proceeding which we had with our erstwhile JV partner in Pune for breaching the non-compete provision in the SHA. I'm happy to share that we have won this arbitration and we have been awarded dues of 7.5 crores, which was an escrow till now, which will now get added to our cash reserve with no effect on the P&L. The outcome of these cases truly affect the business ethics we practice while conducting our business as per agreed terms with partners, while being on the right side of the law and serving our patients. Let me now highlight a couple of points which had a minor impact on our profits in Q1 FY22. You may have noticed that our employee costs and other expenses have risen. With respect to employee expenses, apart from normal increments, it also includes a one-time special incentive to our frontline workers for their selfless efforts during the phase 2 of the pandemic. Motivating and retaining talent is a critical action at this time, and we are investing in our people financially and via learning and development also. Other expenses increased on account of variable pay to third-party centers and investments made in the new network expansion, the result of which will accrue in quarters to come. As the industry is changing, with COVID acting as the ultimate catalyst in accelerating the pace of shift from unorganized to organized, there are many opportunities for consolidation via the inorganic route. However, the valuation expectations between public and private companies is reducing, leading to difficulty in closing deals in the sector. We will continue to evaluate all strategically significant deals that help us consolidate market share in focus cities or to build a B2C platform in non-core cities, and believe we are best placed to conclude such deals due to our large experience in M&A and integration of such businesses. If the right opportunities arise, we would be comfortable in doing deals using stock, cash, and debt as appropriate. Before concluding my part of the speech, I would like to mention that the healthcare sector, including diagnostics, is at a key inflection point. We believe we are at the start of something transformational, and we at Metropolis are keenly watching and evaluating the changing dynamics and will be ready to grab any new opportunity which can enhance our service offering, adding value to our customers and shareholders. That's all from my side. I'll ask Vijinder now to take you through some of the operational parameters.
Thank you, Ameera, and good evening, everyone. Now, let me come to key performance metrics which we track for our progress. First, on revenue share of B2C business. Our revenue share of B2C business in focus cities for non-COVID business increased by 500 BPS from 54% in Q1 FY21 to 59% in Q1 FY22. It has also increased by 100 BPS as compared to FY21. We are swiftly progressing towards our near-term target of reaching 65% with customer-centric approach, focused marketing and branding initiatives, and ramping up home testing offerings. Increasing share of B2C business improves customer stickiness, enhances brand equity, and is margin accretive for the company. We will continue to focus on B2C business, especially in our focus and seeding cities via organic and inorganic route. On specialty test contribution, volume contribution from specialized tests for non-COVID business has increased from 11% in Q1 FY21 to 16% in Q1 FY22, while its revenue contribution has increased from 34% in Q1 FY21 to 41% in Q1 FY22. Our continued focus on research and development has led us to offer a differentiated set of tests which has enhanced our relationship with doctors as well as customers, improving the stickiness of the business. Improving share of specialized tests also leads to higher revenue per patient and revenue per test, leading to better profitability for the company. On home testing business as we have started earlier is one of the most important focus area for us. Revenue from home visits business including COVID increased by 70% year on year to rupees 37 crores in Q1 FY22. If we consider only the non-COVID business, it grew even faster by 130% year on year to rupees 24 crores in Q1 FY22. We are witnessing a shift in preference to home visits even for non-COVID tests on the back of convenience and safety factor. Our home visits coverage has now been extended to 64 locations, and we plan to further extend the coverage to 100 locations by end of FY22 and cover 200 locations by end of FY23. On digital initiatives, we believe that digitization in healthcare is inevitable. Accessing a digital customer experience on Metropolis corporate portal is now live, and the new app will be launched soon. Our smart report feature, which provides an enhanced report experience, and the sample tracking feature, which provides assurance and certainty to consumers, are also live. By digitizing logistics, pickup and travel, real-time home collection scheduling, and implementing a CRM to get one view of customer, will plan to continue to make the consumer experience more seamless. For our B2B and third-party partners, we have recently rolled out a partner portal platform. to get ready digital access to services from Metropolis, and with improved engagement potentially led to higher revenues per partner and more stickiness. We are also working to revamp the platform to make it mobile friendly and add more features as we get feedback from our users. For our doctors, making it simple for them to interact with Metropolis to prescribe tests for patients is our key focus. And as the health tech ecosystem expands, we are actively looking to increase our participation in this area with leading platforms and aggregators. We believe these initiatives will drive more customers to Metropolis and, coupled with science-first approach, strengthen our brand equity. With focused digital and marketing initiatives, we have witnessed 8x increase in our website traffic on year-on-year basis. 3x increase in call volumes due to digital campaigns and faster ramp-up in home visit testing business. As a result of these efforts, about rupees 29 crore of revenue came through leads generated via digital mediums, which is about 9% of Q1 FY22 top line. Our target is to reach 15% revenue contribution through digital leads by end of FY22 and increase it to 1/3 of revenue over the next 3 years. In the last quarter meeting, we spoke about expanding our physical infrastructure in terms of lab and service network to enter into new geographies and strengthen existing ones where we want to increase market share. We've added 4 labs and 161 service network centers during Q1 FY22, taking the total number of labs to 129 and service network to more than 2,700 centers. Most of these new service network comprises of third-party patient service centers, which helps us to expand our network coverage quickly in an asset-light manner. As stated earlier, our plan is to add 90 labs and about 1,800 service centers in next 3 years, giving us entry into 100 to 150 new cities. This expansion will also enable us to penetrate into the deeper parts of the country where we do not have the presence currently. It will also facilitate us to widen our coverage for home testing business and in turn increase the B2C component of the business. For Q1 FY22, we recorded highest ever patient visits at 3.5 million and number of tests at 6.5 million in a quarter. That is, patient visits grew by 158% and number of tests grew by 147% on year-on-year basis. Even on quarter-on-quarter basis, patient visits grew by 11% and number of tests grew by 1%. For Q1 FY22, revenue per patient for non-COVID business increased by 26% year-on-year and 11% quarter-on-quarter to 1028 on the back of improved volume contribution from specialized non-COVID tests. Including COVID, revenue per patient had decreased by 11% year-on-year basis as COVID test prices were at its highest levels in Q1 FY21, which were capped downward during the year. However, in spite of that, overall revenue per patient increased on quarter-on-quarter basis. For Q1 FY22, revenue per test for non-COVID business increased by 17% year-on-year and 13% quarter-on-quarter to 473 rupees. Including COVID revenue per test has reduced by 7% year-on-year due to same reason mentioned earlier, which is lowering of COVID price tests. However, on quarter-on-quarter basis, revenue per test still grew by 11%. Our revenue profile among focused, feeding and other cities stood as follows. Focus cities, 5 cities including the city and peripheral area around metropolitan region, contributed 58% to the total revenue in Q1 FY22. Feeding cities, 8 cities including the city and peripheral area around the region, contributed 22% to the total revenue in Q1 FY22. Rest of the other cities contributed 20% of the revenue in Q1 FY22. Our revenue share of B2C business in focus cities for non-COVID business has increased by 500 BPS from 54% in Q1 FY21 to 59% in Q1 FY22. With increasing marketing initiatives towards the B2C side of the business, we are confident to reach our target of 65% soon. With respect to geographical distribution, revenue contribution from West region was 56%. South contributed 24%, North contributed 10%, while rest was contributed from East and international locations. With respect to test mix on volume and value basis, during Q1 FY22 for non-COVID business, the volume contribution from specialized tests increased to 20% as compared to 11% in Q1 FY21. Revenue contribution from the same increased to 41% in Q1 FY22 as compared to 34% in Q1 FY21 in line with our strategy. The volume and value mix overall continues to see improvement. To conclude from my end, our focus going ahead will continue on ramping up the non-COVID business, improve B2C contribution of the business and expanding the service network, ramping up the home visit business with focused marketing initiatives and complete digitization. Higher share of specialized non-COVID tests, automation and cost efficiency initiatives, along with the other factors at play, will lead to improvement in profitability with higher scale of business. This will lead to significant improvement in customer experience in long run, and in turn will enhance the brand equity of Metropolis. That's all from my side. I will now ask Rakesh to take you through the financials.
Thank you, Jindal. Good evening to everyone on the call. Let me give you a snapshot of our financial performance. Q1 financial year 22 revenue stood at rupees 327 crore as compared to rupees 143 crore in Q1 financial year 21, up by 128% YoY. On Q1Q basis, it grew by 12%. Non-COVID business contributed 81% of the revenue, while COVID RT-PCR contributed the rest 19% of the revenue during Q1. Non-COVID revenue stood at rupees 264 crore in Q1 financial year 22 as compared to rupees 102 crore in Q1 financial year 21, up by 159% YoY. On quarter-on-quarter basis, it grew by 5%. COVID RT-PCR revenue stood at 63 crore in Q1 financial year 22, up by 53% on YoY as well as Q1Q basis on account of second wave of COVID-19. EBITDA before CSR and ESOP stood at rupees 105.6 crore in Q1 financial year 22 as compared to 13.1 crore in Q1 financial year 21, more than 8x on YoY basis. On Q1Q basis, increased by 2%. EBITDA margin before CSR and ESOP expanded by more than 2,300 basis points YoY to 32.3%. Reported PAT stood at 74.9 crore in Q1 financial year 22, more than 26x on YoY basis and up by 22% on QoQ basis. PAT is positively impacted by gain on account of rise back of past due with global hospitals. Coming to our working capital ratios, our debtors days has improved further from 44 days in March 21 to 36 days in June 21. So as on June 21, our DSO stands at 36 days. Overall working capital days has increased from 4 days in March 21 to 12 days in June 21, partly on account of improved creditors days and because of higher inventory. Our liquidity positions remain very strong. Cash and cash equivalent of rupees 461 crore as on June 21st. OCF EBITDA stood at 71% for Q1 financial 22. That is all from our side. We now leave the floor open for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin the question and answer session. Anyone who wishes to ask a question may enter star and 1 on their touchtone telephone. If your questions have been answered and you wish to withdraw yourself from the queue, you may enter star and 2. Participants are requested to use handsets while asking a question. Ladies and gentlemen, we will wait for a moment while the question queue assembles. We have the first question from the line of Pooja Bhatia from Morgan Stanley. Please go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Ameera, since COVID contribution has moderated in May, June and would continue subject to the third wave, I guess, what would the normalized EBITDA margins be like when things normalize? Right now, we are seeing 30% plus this quarter. I understand there will be several moving parts, I guess, the business mix, channel mix, the cost, but just roughly, would it be higher, lower than the pre-COVID level?
Hi, Pooja. So in the last quarter, actually, we had shared that we would hope and expect EBITDA margins for the whole year of 21-22 to be higher than the entire year of 2021. And that would be a blended average of some quarters where obviously it might be higher due to certain reasons, and there would be some seasonality effect. But on the overall year basis, it should be higher.
Okay, so would be with robust expansion plans underway, would this dilute your margins in the longer term over a 3-year period?
So when we actually looked at the expansion, the network expansion, it dilutes our EBITDA in the short term, in the first 2-3 years, by about 0.75 to 1%. And what we have done is that to compensate for that dilution, we have started cost efficiency projects at the back end and to neutralize the impact of the dilution because of expansion. And therefore, we are saying that keeping the cost efficiency benefit and the expansion, overall, we believe that we should still be higher than all of last year.
Understood. Two decades ago, when the company was in the initial phase, the idea was to grow in home markets, focus cities. Now that we have a sizable presence here, wanting to expand in more geographies, I guess pretty much similar to what other regional players are doing. I believe there will be a considerable overlap in certain markets. So, how would your value proposition be different versus the other? The reason why I ask is all companies are following the digital route. I guess this is the need of the hour, building own online app, investing in logistics, etc. So how would a patient really choose between two service providers which stand to have a strong brand presence, say, in the same vicinity?
So Neha, I think let's just take a step back. I mean, when we talk about the industry, we still talk about 90% unorganized. And, the unorganized industry is not even fully using computers today. Forget about having apps and building digital platforms. So really, we've always maintained that the larger story here is the move from unorganized to organized, and not really the competition between the organized players. That's not really the story here. But to answer your question on how patients would make a decision, we have to remember that ours is not a simple consumer service. It is a medical healthcare consumer service, which means you're finally, that while your technology may be great, your features may be great, your service may be great, finally what people are buying from you is an accurate test report. And your brand and credibility of being able to deliver that is the most critical thing that you actually bring to the table. So today also the way patients make decisions is along with their doctors in choosing the right diagnostics brand, which is based on quality and then service and experience and other factors. And we don't believe that that's going to change, because as much as technology comes into play, you still need an accurate diagnostic report. So that will continue being the most important thing. I think frankly, what we are hearing in the industry is very, very limited number of players, maybe 2, 3, 4 players are talking about even building a digital engagement with their consumers. So it's a very limited number actually that we are actually seeing. Majority of the industry is still very much steeped in the more traditional mold of brick and mortar.
Understood, very helpful. One more, if I may. There's been a lot of interest of late in the sector. We're seeing new regional companies tapping the capital markets. There's online aggregators are scaling up. Hospitals are expanding their presence. How would this impact the pricing? Would there be a pressure on pricing in the near term?
Again, I think we have to separate the kinds of diagnostics that we are talking about. The companies that you're talking about that are looking at a public issue, I don't think they're looking at a public issue to raise money and then bring the prices down. That has been done even without raising money from the public market. So I think if they had to create competitive intensity, that happened already. In fact, both going public, I think there will be probably more pressure on profitability and margins. So I don't necessarily see that happening. As far as hospitals and other people coming to the sector, again, this is a very old story. Many people have already come into the sector over many years and already brought that competitive intensity in. Overall, I think there is, if you break up the basket, you'll see there is wellness, there is chronic and acute testing. Acute testing is when the patient gets sick. You have a fever, you go to a doctor says, hey, you need to get some tests done for me to find out what's causing the fever. And the doctor needs an accurate report and therefore guides you to a lab that they trust. That may be Metropolis, it may be somebody else in a different core geography. But the patient is not, the only decision maker there is with the doctor. So we believe that decision making will continue the same way as it is happening today. You then have the second bucket, which is the chronic bucket, where you have patients who are diabetics and who today are mostly above a certain age of 50-55. There will be a percentage of those who are tech-friendly and who may want to experiment with new bundling of services and opportunities they get. But there will be also a large number of that bucket who will prefer to continue with their lab that they have been going to, because the data will be standardized, their data records will be with the lab, they are comfortable with the phlebotomist, etc., etc. And they're not necessarily they're not tech evangelists, right? They're a little older age group. So we don't expect that the entire chronic base is just going to shift over onto digital platforms. And then you have wellness. And again, you have multiple categories of customers. There are customers who are saying, look, I want to buy a wellness of 3,000 or 5,000 rupees, which is premium wellness, and I want to do it from a credible brand. And then there is value wellness, which is probably less than 1,000 rupees, where they're looking at promos and discounts and commercial benefits. And that is now a growing market. And obviously in that area, I think you will probably see more price competition, because price will be one of the key factors in which consumers make calls. But in chronic and in acute, I don't think price will be the most important factor.
Understood. Thank you for this, and I'll get back in the queue.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move to the next question, we would like to request participants to restrict their questions to 2 during the initial round. We have the next question from the line of Anubhav Agarwal from Credit Suisse. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Good evening. One question was on the when you talk about increasing the home collection network for you, as well as increasing the patient service center, I just wanted to understand, how do you decide, take a call, let's say, in a certain area, whether to increase the home collection versus increasing more number of patient service centers? The context of the question which I'm asking this is, in my view, it's more profitable for you to go for the home collection. So why such a strong target that you have for the patient service center versus home collection?
So largely, I think home collection is more of a behavioral change which has come due to COVID. So largely, almost all the cities, you take any city, especially in India, people preference would be more towards home visit. So hence we said in our speech also that we want to expand our home visit services from current 64 to 100 cities, and then from there so and so forth. But definitely there is an opportunity in many of the cities where we do not have a lab or a home collection facility. So in those markets we are looking at opening collection centers first. So the first level of entry point in certain markets would be through collection centers, and there will be certain markets which are strong markets in our geography, in the ecosystem of West India, South India, and a couple of North India also. There we want to start a lab also coupled with collection centers. So I think it's a mixed strategy, but largely I think the entry point in any new city would be through collection center.
And in established market in Mumbai, you would ideally want to have more number of home collection points incrementally, right? Because that gives you the chance of converting the B2B business also into B2C, right?
See, there is no end to building capacity on home visit. So you have to have a hybrid model where you give both choices to the patients, because we've seen in last 3 quarters there has been a good traction on home visit, and of course the traction on footfalls has also started going up, because with expansion of collection center you are going much closer to the patients.
So just my clarity on this, and this is my last question on this home collection. So from customer perspective, what have you seen? Yes, last 2 quarters have been different, but what's your sense? If you, let's say, if you were not to charge anything on the home collection, and then it's the same price whether he walks into the lab or you come to the home and collect the samples, what do you think is the customer's first preference?
Customer first preference, of course, would be home services. But there are set of customers who prefer going to a nearest collection center. Earlier, what used to happen is that the patient used to travel to farther distance in order to give their samples. Now he has got 2 choices. One is home visit, and second is a collection center which is close to his place. And that is what we mean by expansion, going closer to patient.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Neha Manpuria from JP Morgan. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. One question on the non-COVID trend in the quarter. First, if I look at the volumes, the revenue through the month, even though there wasn't that much of a disruption, we haven't really seen the pickup that we would see as, unlocking happened, let's say in May, June. So, have we normalized fully, or do you think there is further normalization in the non-COVID business? And second, on the ASP trend of the non-COVID business, the quarter-on-quarter improvement due to the specialty test, is that related to the surge in COVID, or do you think this is more sustainable given our focus on increasing the specialty mix? Just trying to understand if this is a one-off and we should see that ASP normalize again going forward.
Sure, Neha. Look, I think on the first part about non-COVID, we have to remember that the government unlocking in June is not necessarily, ours is not a consumer service. Suddenly you unlock and everybody goes to a market and sort of buys testing, right? Unlike a consumer good. It depends a lot on mindset. And I think how badly people were tormented with health in April and May, I think there continued to be a hangover of being afraid of necessarily going out and interacting, especially with necessary healthcare if it was not needed. So I think usually I've seen the gap between a wave and normalization of non-COVID will take a few months and not happen instantly. And I think that will get reflected in my mind in July, August, September, more likely than it will in immediately in June. The second question about specialized tests, I mean, as we've always maintained, our focus on specialized tests and generating it and going to doctors and making sure that we are building sticky business continue. And we are seeing a nice uptake in that business, and that's what is being reflected in the revenue per patient, which we have given to you with COVID and without COVID. And you'll see an uptick in both. And especially in the one without COVID, that is a reflection of these efforts.
Okay, so there is a fair bit of stickiness in the specialty contribution. You wouldn't say it's linked to the let's say comorbidity issue arising out of the pandemic or the surge in COVID cases.
No, because some of the tests which are what you call as the COVID rub-off or COVID allied tests are not necessarily what you consider as super specialized or specialized.
Okay.
A lot of them would actually fall in the semi-specialized bucket.
Okay. So yeah, okay, that helps. And a second, since Vijendra, Rakesh, the variable pay to third party, and I understand the impact from an expansion of network point of view. But this variable pay to third party, is that because of the higher COVID volumes that we saw in the quarter? Because even as a percentage of revenue, it does seem high in this quarter.
Yeah, so there's a combination of both things. That one is that this quarter we have seen the revenue going up, and particularly on this third-party centers. So because of the COVID scenario, a lot of rub-off testing also happening. So that is one reason why this revenue share has gone up a bit. And secondly, because we are expanding our network on APSCs and third-party network very aggressively. So this is something which is going to happen a bit, but that is something that's part of our strategy. So it's not that this is something which has come out of the blue moon. So we understood that once we go aggressively in our third-party network, there will be some revenue share which will go up on this, and that is what has been factored in, and that is something which we have already aware of. So that's the reason why there is a bit of a decrease in EBITDA margin. That's the only thing which we have mentioned. But otherwise, this is a part of our strategy to really go aggressive in third-party and increase revenue from a B2C share. Yeah.
Understood. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Shyam Srinivasan from Goldman Sachs. Please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for taking my question. Just first one on the non-COVID revenues. If I just look at it on a 2-year CAGR basis, so 1Q22 was on 1Q20, just to try and understand, how that splits out. It's about 13% CAGR on the non-COVID revenues. And it splits out as 9% on realization and 3% on volume. So just tying back to some of the previous questions, looks like 3%, and when I look at your historical run rate, that volume growth typically has been higher. That has been maybe 7-8%. So is part of the solution to get volumes up, is that network expansion led, you think, or given where we are in terms of our core market? Is that how we should read it, or do you think the 3% is a function of the lockdowns and the points that you just made, and 3% should ideally go back to 6 or 7%?
No, I think 3% is very much an outcome of the lockdowns and the fact that COVID has overwhelmed everybody's lives, right? I mean, I think when we have to realize that this is happening to patients, right? So it is about what makes them sick. Now, when everybody is not traveling, everybody is at home, nobody's eating out, automatically the wellness and health piece actually goes higher because people are taking extra care of themselves, so they avoid getting COVID, and which also means they avoid getting other diseases. So it's very natural that less people are falling sick, less people are going to doctors, less people are getting tests. And which is why the main infection that's spreading is COVID. Now, if we choose to separate the main infection, which is COVID, from all the others, it will not necessarily give us a fair picture because the patient is the same. They happen to have COVID today, and they may or may not have some other infection in the future. So I think the way we are looking at it is when you're looking at volumes of patients, you have to look at them combined. Because this is another illness or a sickness happening to a patient. And the patient, like I said, today may come to us for testing for COVID, and tomorrow, if the experience is good, come for some other infection or disease. So to us, it's an outcome of that, and nothing else. Nothing else has really changed in the equation to change the historical volume growth rates at all.
Got it. That's very helpful. So if I now look ahead and just look at the expansion that you're talking about, the numbers that you put out, are these new numbers relative to the previous, or we've just articulated what some of these specific numbers are, the 90 odd labs that you're adding? And just trying to add, is there a larger goal in terms of where we want to be from a longer term revenue target perspective? Is that something that is driving these network expansion parameters?
I think the revenue target is the outcome of the efforts we put in, right? So the network expansion is one of the key growth drivers that will help us reach those outcomes. And there are basically three sort of main levers, four. One is obviously geographical expansion, which is to go closer to the patient in the cities we are already present in. And second, to go closer to the patient in new cities where we never had labs before. And that's the geographical expansion that we are doing. The second one is to take existing products and tests to the geographies or to the doctors or to the patients which earlier were not using them. So how do you really get more tests prescribed to patients where they need it? And how do you get patients to move up the value chain to more specialized tests? That's part of the second sort of key strategy. The third one is about channel movement. That with now patients also wanting to use home services or digitally coming and becoming aware, how can you use these new channels of awareness, brand building and acquisition to further your growth? And obviously the fourth one is inorganic. So I think we would continue using all four key growth drivers, and the network expansion is only one of them. And hopefully, obviously, all these combined together would lead to the kind of revenue growth that we hope to achieve.
Got it. Last question, just on an update. We put a release on Hitech that we're probably not able to reach out to the group. So what are the next steps? What could likely happen? And the related question is, we have about 450 crores of cash and cash equivalents. So how should we look at inorganic play and the points you made at the start about valuation being a hurdle? So just your qualitative color there. Thank you.
Sure. I think on the first question, if there's anything material, we'll obviously come back and update shareholders. We are exploring all options at this point to bring, that deal to some sort of a closure one way or the other. And of course, if there's anything material, we will come back and inform shareholders as soon as possible. On the second side, which is on the cash on book and what is the thought, we continue to be very optimistic and excited about all the opportunities in the market. And as we said, we are continuously watching and looking out for inorganic opportunities. We are also looking and exploring digital health tech avenues. So there are a bunch of things that we are exploring at this point. And therefore, we do believe that over the next year or two, there will be significant opportunities to potentially invest in. While things are getting more expensive, we would like to continue to remain prudent and disciplined about the kind of investments we make. But at the same time, we always want to be ready to make sure that we are able to jump on any opportunity that we think is a strategically good fit for us.
Thank you and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Krishnendu Saha from Quantum Asset Management. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Just one something. Could you call out the number of patients you service for COVID and non-COVID for this quarter and also for the full year of 2021?
Sorry, I can't hear you clearly. Can you, your voice is very muffled.
No? Can you hear me now? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Just could you call out the number of patients for COVID and non-COVID separately for this quarter and for the full year FY21?
Yes, so this year we have a total of 35 lakh customers visiting us in this quarter, out of which 10 lakh customers visited us for COVID and 26 lakh customers visited us for non-COVID. For the financial year 21, we have 98 lakh customers visiting us, out of which 14 lakhs were COVID and 85 lakhs were non-COVID.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Rajesh Kothari from Alpha Accurate Advisors. Please go ahead.
Good evening, ma'am. Thanks for the opportunity. My first question is with reference to this resolution of raising money. Can you give a little bit more color on that?
I think the idea of the resolution is only an enabling resolution. I mean, as a public company, obviously one of the privileges and benefits is to be able to go to public shareholders and be able to raise that money at the, as and when required. As we mentioned in the last call, we are exploring, several opportunities on all sides, and we just wanted to make sure that we are ready, from a regulatory perspective in terms of getting a board resolution, that as and when, if any such opportunities arise, we are able to sort of seize the opportunity and come to our shareholders. So at this point, nothing specific to it. It is just an enabling resolution.
So when you are writing, preference shares and or public issue, doesn't include QIP, or that clause also includes QIP?
It's actually a very general resolution, like I said, just enabling. It just includes all the opportunities for fundraising. There's nothing, like I said, there's no specific thought at this point of time.
Understood. And my second question is, as you rightly mentioned that in last probably 6-7 months, the kind of valuations which has gone up, making it a little bit difficult to acquire the companies. But so in terms of, your capital allocation policy and the decision-making process, which was there about 7 months back, should we assume to remain the same, or you are changing your internal targets also in terms of, the payback period of such acquisitions, considering that recent valuations have, inched up?
I think, we would like to continue to be obviously prudent, and look at things from a sustainability perspective. And while there has been a recent jump up in valuations, I think if you look at it from a sustainability basis, I think, we just want to make disciplined calls. At this point of time, I don't think our policy has changed radically as far as capital allocation or any of that. But of course, we are, like I said, exploring, opportunities to really see if they fit. Sometimes it might be possible, obviously, that we look at an opportunity which may or may not, pay off handsomely in the short term, but strategically is good for us in the long term. And there might be different lens to look at that through. And of course, if such an opportunity does arise, then we would be happy to share sort of the thought and strategy behind it. But at this point of time, obviously, there is nothing on the anvil to share.
Okay. My only, limited concern was, I hope that you continue to maintain your prudent, capital efficiency policy, which has been there, throughout last so many years. Because recent, euphoria of such kind of IPOs and equity market is making at times, the decision a little bit more what I would say, instead of 3-4 years payback, it becomes 8, 9, 10 years payback, and then ultimately basically it bleeds the balance sheet. So my suggestion was only that kindly remain prudent in capital allocation. In terms of this the digital initiatives what you are taking, are you putting anything into a separate subsidiary, and then suppose you get a opportunity which is a more like a digital link opportunity, are you exploring such option whereby you can get the right technology partner, so your pharmacy domain and the technology domain, and that can grow on its own in a bigger way?
There are obviously lots of ideas and exploratory thoughts at this point, and I think it's too early to be able to sort of have any specific comment. But I mean, in short, I think we are exploring all opportunities to see really what makes sense for us. I think we should be in a better position to be able to give more specific comments. I think hopefully sooner than later.
Okay, great. Thank you. Wish you all the best.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Surjit Pal from Prabhudas Lilladher. Please go ahead.
Good evening, all. I have one question. In terms of capex or in terms of next set of investments, are you guys going for any kind of setup or acquisition of any kind of digital marketing going forward?
Nothing specific that we have identified at this point of time, that we can comment on. Of course, if anything, something specific does come up, we will obviously come back to shareholders. But, we are exploring, like I said, all opportunities to see if there's anything that really fits with us. And finally, whether you do anything on the digital or the offline side, there has to be synergy creation, whether it's on the cost side or the revenue side. We do believe that the way healthcare is moving, there is a place for an offline and an online model and to become omni-channel. And if there are partners who could create synergy with us, we would explore. I think a little bit early to comment on any specific opportunities.
Okay. And the second question is that, you might have seen that, some of the activities going on by hospitals, by integrated service providing opportunity. So this is a kind of a new trend has come where people are getting more and more into integrated service providing market space, where both OPD as well as dispensing of medicine as well as diagnostic, both these spaces are there. So being a dominant player in diagnostic space with so much of cash, is there any possibility going forward with the backing of you guys are also getting into that mode where you will be leading and getting into offering integrated service from this existing conventional model of diagnostic business?
I mean, I think it's definitely worth exploring to really see, whether there is merit in really looking at an expanded integrated health offering. There are obviously some significant strengths that we have. We do have a large number of consumers and customers who trust us and believe in us. We obviously have data, and we obviously have relationships, not only on the consumer side but also on the provider side. So there are some strengths, and I think the goal is to figure out whether these enable for an integrated health ecosystem expansion. And those are all some of the conversations and exploration that we would do.
Thank you. I think that is going to be a trend for next 2 years in the sector, and we could be seeing many deals into that space. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Rahul Agarwal from InCred Capital. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. Am I audible?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So, Amir, a related question, generally the discussion has been around M&A, but very specific to, what has recently happened with the pharmacy Thyrocare deal, and more so for the metro and the tier 1 markets. What change would you expect, once they are settled down and absorb Thyrocare fully? As I said, especially for metro and tier 1 markets, do you think these combined services and impact on the chronic side? You explained that you're not expecting a lot of shift there, but my sense is, given next 12 to 24 months, there might be some kind of chronic illness pressures, pricing pressure here. Any sense on this specifically?
No, like I said, I think you have to look at the bucket separately. And I think while on the wellness side, I do believe that there will be some price competition. We have been actually quite aware of and conscious of this, and therefore you will see the wellness business that Metropolis does is actually not a value wellness which is based on pricing, but it is a wellness which is more based on quality and service. And the customer that comes to us is more premium in segment. And therefore, I don't see too much overlap, at least in that part for us in the short term. On the chronic side, look, there will be an attempt obviously to try to bundle many things together. And like in every category and every industry, there will be some consumers who find value in that. But I think it would be incorrect to assume that every customer will, for pricing, especially in healthcare, take a call to move away from their comfort zone. It's a simple point. I think to myself that if I'm going to a particular doctor in a particular lab where I'm comfortable with results, I'm comfortable with the blood collection, I'm comfortable, it's close to my house, etc. And if somebody gave me 50 rupees cheaper, would I shift? Most logically, I think the answer would be unlikely to be yes. So, it would be no. So, I think the average consumer, what we've seen from market research, that when it comes to health, pricing is not their topmost concern. Their topmost concern is acceptance of the brand by the doctor. And number two, their own service experience and comfort.
Got it. Related question to the fundraising question which the earlier participant asked. So obviously at this point, we don't have anything specific to share. But going forward, given the promoter holding right now in the company is about 50%, just shade around that. In terms of if any fundraising really happens over the next 12 months, this would actually dilute you down. So any thoughts in terms of owning majority control in the company?
See, I think majority is, I would say, more a state of mind than anything else. I think, we're already the largest shareholder in the company and driving the management. I think dilution of a few percentage points, if it's helping the company move forward in a significant way and leaping forward, then to us it makes sense to do. And obviously this is, like I said, at this point just an enabling resolution. We are not looking to raise funds immediately. So I think, the idea will be just to be ready if opportunities do come up that are exciting, that our mind is clear and we are able to seize the opportunity quickly.
And lastly, just a short one on the profitability for non-COVID versus COVID. So it seems like, earlier there were differences, but right now it looks like, given the numbers, there is no difference between, what we're making on COVID, non-COVID. Any thoughts on gross margin or EBITDA? That's my last question. Thank you so much.
We're not really monitoring profitability separately for both at this time because the infrastructure at the back end is common. So it's quite difficult to actually separate the two. As we've been maintaining, COVID has definitely been adding to the group profit. And that continues to be the case. Of course, if pricing moves down further, then of course there is a chance the margins may change. But so far we've managed to manage our costs well, even when prices have come down. And let's hope that continues to be the case.
Thank you so much. All the best. Thank you for answering.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Kumar Gaurav from Kotak. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I have only one. So on the digital online front, we have been investing a lot of late to improve our offerings. And you have, also highlighted the importance of having an app and spoken about the digital ambitions. However, when I see the Google Play Store, for example, the app has a rating of 1.5, which is significantly lower than all other diagnostic as well as e-health players. The reviews are also super poor. Is there any specific reason, why we are lacking on this front, and are we taking any steps to improve user experience?
Absolutely taking multiple steps. In fact, the current app is not one that we believe that we want to push, which is why we are not promoting it heavily. We believe that we can come up with a much better experience and app than we currently have, which is actually under development as we speak. our corporate portal actually offers now a digital experience where you can make a booking, where you can schedule, you can save. So we are almost ready on the portal side of it, and I think the app will come soon as well. I think it's a matter of one more quarter where we should be able to be in a much better place as far as the digital experience goes, from a start to finish. But pieces of that will already come into play this month. So I think we are very cognizant of it and very much working towards it. So it's not far away; it's a matter of few months.
Thanks, and all the best.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Bhavya Doshi from Chris Portfolio. Please go ahead.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just one question. Pardon me, if it is a repeat because I missed the initial commentary. On the non-COVID part, that is 63 crores. The COVID part, that is 63 crores. Just wanted to understand that includes only RT-PCR, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, there can be some of the tests like LDH, ferritin, which were due to the COVID, we have included in the non-COVID non-COVID revenues.
So that's how we are showing the numbers since beginning. So all the other tests which are peripheral comes under non-COVID, and COVID includes only RT-PCR.
Okay. And second thing, sir, we did mention that we wish to expand our networks. So what proportion going forward would be the owned and the third party? Can you share some color on that, or will it be more on basis of what we have been doing in the past?
So 90 labs would be company owned, and out of 1800 collection centers, 90 to 95% would be third party.
Got it. And going forward, okay, got it, sir. Thank you so much. That's it from my side, and wish you all the best.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Prakash Kapadia from Anived Portfolio Managers. Please go ahead.
Thanks for the support in these testing times. A couple of questions from my side. Now, post-COVID, any changes in consumer behavior you think are happening? Are they, preferring more branded and larger players as compared to smaller players? Is that a trigger for, higher and faster growth in the near term? Why I'm trying to understand this is, Ameera, you did mention about, the fact that elevated valuations are there, so M&A could be slightly difficult to do as a measure of prudence. And, given that high-tech deal you announced, there seems to be no communication or interest from their end. So what is the game plan for south of India? Because, apart from Chennai, they had decent presence in Karnataka, Kerala, AP. So if you could give some color on that also.
Sure. I'll take your question about South India first, and we'll come to consumer behavior. So, currently we are already leaders in many of the markets in South India without this acquisition. So this was only a consolidation acquisition. It was not an entry acquisition. So at this point in Chennai, we are the leading players. In Bangalore, we are number 2. And in many markets of South India, including Kerala and including in Andhra, we have a relevant role. Kerala, I think also we are number 2. And in many markets of Andhra and rest of Tamil Nadu, we have a good growing business. So South India is already a very major area for us. And if you look at our presentation, you'll get some of the data on how South India contributes to our total revenue share as well. As far as the point on consumer behavior, and I'll come back to the acquisition pieces then. See, I think, firstly, obviously, COVID is not over yet. I mean, we are still in the middle of a second wave in rural India. And there is obviously an expectation of a third wave as well. So we believe that most of this year is probably going to, have a large amount of COVID as a big part of it, for all of us as citizens. And consumer behavior, while it's changing, there's so much of volatility in terms of opening, lockdown, what can happen, cannot happen. It's quite difficult to gauge exactly where this is going to land up. While there is a lot of excitement around digital ecosystems, we have to realize that today 100% of the profit pool comes from offline brick and mortar healthcare, And I would say 98% of the revenue pool comes from brick and mortar healthcare. Digital is definitely going to play a very important role in the future. But at this point of time, it doesn't play a huge role, at least as far as diagnostics goes. What we are talking about is preparing ourselves for the future and making sure that we are being very proactive about it. The two things that we have definitely seen from consumers, which we are quite sure about, is that out of 100 to 150,000 labs in the industry, about 2,000 have been approved for COVID testing. So during this past 18 months, customers have largely for COVID testing had to go to these 2,000 labs, which meant that there has been definitely a consolidation and a concentration of patients in these 2,000 labs out of the 100 to 150,000. So definitely the brand name and visibility of these 2,000 labs has gone up, which makes you believe that there will be consumers potentially wanting to go back to these 2,000 labs since they have experienced branded services, maybe compared to what they had experienced in the unorganized sector before. Now we have to remember that while consumers may have had this experience, when they finally get sick, they will still go back to the doctor, and the doctor and the patient together will make the decision as to where the patient goes. So you may not see a 100% conversion of a patient who came to your lab for COVID is now coming to you for everything else. But if you are able to work with the doctors and with the patients and drive engagement, then hopefully there should be a reasonable conversion. But that will not play out in 6 months, it will play out in the next few years, because people will finally come to you when they need testing, when they fall sick, not just on their own. So that's definitely one change in consumer behavior. I think the second expectation that's happened is that people with digital adoption in every other industry, I think consumers are now saying that, look, I want to interact with you through the portal, through an app, through digital, etc. And they are saying that, look, why can't I have an Amazon/Uber experience in diagnostics? So I think the expectation of what kind of experience they want is now changing. And I think over the next few years, we will see that this will become an important part of at least the very digitally ahead customers as far as all parts of healthcare goes. And that's where we are preparing ourselves for that opportunity and for that time to come. And we would rather be a first mover rather than a laggard, in that space. Just on the last piece of valuations and acquisitions, while yes, acquisitions are becoming more expensive, and we are seeing public markets reward even regional players probably quite disproportionately. We have to remember there are other reasons also why people exit businesses or they look at doing sales. Not every company wants to go public. So I think there will still be opportunities. I think the important thing will be, like we said, to be prudent, but more importantly, do things that are strategically aligned to the focus of the company, and and to combine those two when deciding capital allocation.
Understood. That's very clear. And just one data keeping point, over a period of time, we've seen the data day improvement continue a bit. So over the next, medium term, next 2 years or so, what should this in terms of number of days look like?
So yeah, you are right that in last 1.5 years, 2 years, we have been able to really reduce the number quite significantly. And obviously, the alignment and whatever automation, visibility which we have brought in and the rigor which we have brought in has helped us. So right now we are sitting at 36 days. Obviously, the target is that we can bring it down to 30 days. That's something which we are looking at. I think that will be more to say sustainable for future. What can we do next? I think we'll check once we reach there. But right now,
the midterm looks like 30 days kind of. Thanks. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Shanti Patel from Shanti Patel Investment Advisors. Please go ahead.
Congratulations for the dynamic leadership of Ameera and her team for achieving good results year after year. And special congratulations for getting the Bombay Ratna Award to her. Now let us come to the question. I have been told that government is considering to put a cap on the charges for various tests that we conduct. What is truth in that? And secondly, the organized sector constitutes approximately, I think, 80% in our industry. So why the organized people represent the government to do something about that?
Thank you for your kind words. Firstly, we are trying our best in these very challenging times. On your point about price capping or government initiating anything of the sort, frankly, we have not had any such discussion, dialogue, initiation from the government at all towards the lab players. While they have used the Essential Services Act and the Emergency Act to cap COVID testing in different states, this has not percolated, to a vast number of other diagnostic tests. There is, I think, one state in which they have done something for some of the other COVID rub-off tests. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's MP, but I could be mistaken there. I'm not sure of the state. But we have not seen that proliferate across different states. But on other non-COVID tests, we have not seen any such initiative at all. I am currently the Secretary of NatHealth, which is the premier health association, which works on policy advocacy with the government. And we are continuously engaging with the central government on representing the industry. So that is a continuous process.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Pooja Bhatia from Morgan Stanley. Please go ahead.
Just one from my side. Is it possible to quantify the value of COVID allied tests this quarter?
At this point of time, I think we have not taken out that cut of data. We've not been providing it quarter by quarter, so we won't be able to answer your question right away, but maybe we can come back to you.
No worries. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Mr. Praveen Sahai. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you for detailed explanations and such a long call. One query related to the non-COVID business. As a monthly run rate you had provided for the last quarter, April, May and June. So there we had seen some decline from April is a peak of a 99.6 and then decline. And so as for the COVID as well. So how is the trend right now going for a non-COVID? And why the non-COVID peaked out in the April along with the COVID revenue?
So as Rakesh was explaining earlier, the COVID rub-off test is part of non-COVID in our categorization. And therefore, that also peaks usually when COVID PCR tests peak. And then when COVID settles down, the COVID rub-off tests also settle down. And that's the impact that you are seeing in April, May, June, that as COVID came down, the COVID rub-off tests, which are part of non-COVID, also came down in May and June. We believe that Q2 will be a stronger quarter in terms of non-COVID because obviously there would be more movement of people, unlocking happening. So on the non-COVID side, we believe that it should be higher than Q1.
And is it possible to give the COVID test volume for the last quarter?
I don't think we have it as of now. Maybe we can send it to you later. We make a note.
Yeah, sure. So the last question is related to the NACO contract. How much is that contributing nowadays to our revenue? And is there any plan for such type of a contracts, government contracts for a future?
The government projects continue to contribute a small amount of the revenue, single digit of revenue. So it's not a very large component of it. We are, while we look at PPPs, we see that usually in the state PPPs, we don't find full comfort in terms of bidding for them because sometimes we find the practices to be quite challenging. In terms of quality practices and operational practices. But sometimes the central government contracts, like the one we've done for NACO, can tend to be, sort of more fair and more based on quality parameters. So if there are such other opportunities that come about, which we feel are giving fair value to our expertise, we would be obviously happy and excited to bid for those.
Okay. Great, ma'am. Thank you, and thank you for your time for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have the next question from the line of Ashish Kacholia from Lucky Investment. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening to the Metropolis team. Ameera, I have a basic capital allocation question for you. When you have done all these acquisitions, they look very, very expensive on the face of it. So can you share with us some financial target that you set out, may not be immediately, but say 3 years out, what is the kind of return on capital that you are seeing from our allocation on these kind of acquisitions?
See, I think if you look at all the acquisitions, hi Ashish, all the acquisitions we have done in the past 20 odd years, at the time that we have done them, they may appear, at the time when we did acquisitions in early 2000s, and we paid sort of 7 times multiple, 8 times multiple of EBITDA. At the time, those would have looked expensive. But as we've seen in the market, finally these acquisitions are not just adding revenue. These were entry points for us in those times new markets where we did not have a brand. And therefore, we were able to really grow those acquisitions, integrate them, and get great value from them over time. The strategy today, obviously, after already being a pan-India player, may be slightly different. We might still get into some markets from an entry point, and therefore the brand value would be significant and valuable. But there is also another strategy, which is to consolidate market share in existing cities, because in healthcare, we do believe that having a large market share in a single city can contribute significantly to the bottom line, and also from a strategic nature as well. So, I think the way we are looking at capital allocation is really more from a strategic and a prudence point of view. But, if you look at anything from a pure financial metrics at this point of time, they may not always make sense only from a numerical point of view, but you have to look at it as a combination of value creation that they're creating over a long period.
You see, while I take your point about the strategic angle of these acquisitions, I'm not denying that or questioning that. My thought is that, ultimately companies are valued based on the kind of return on capital that they generate. And if we allocate large chunks of capital into these kind of acquisitions, which are accretive to ROC, or they come up to the base level of company ROC after 10 years, then our stock price will suffer in the short term. So like what we are seeing right now is that there is a very visible divergence that has happened between Dr. Lal's stock price and our stock price. So I'm not saying that your strategy, I'm not questioning your strategy. I'm just trying to understand from investors' point of view whether we are going to see significant ROC dilution over the next 3 years. I'm not saying 1 quarter, 3 quarter. I'm saying next 3 years, at the end of 3 years, are we going to see a substantial dilution in our ROC? Because now you're going to raise further capital. And if this capital also gets allocated into these kind of acquisitions which are strategic but ROC dilutive, so we have seen generally that the P multiple gets derated in a very substantial manner. So just wanted your thoughts on this point.
Yeah, I think if you look at the ROCs today, ROCEs, we are talking about sort of a 35% kind of number, right? Which is obviously exceptionally high in any industry. Now, if we want to maintain and if we use this as a benchmark going forward, then frankly, as shareholders and as this, we have to continue to be then happy with the pace of growth that we have been seeing and look at it more as a consistent cash flow business, but not so much as a growth business. One of the very high growth business. So of course, even a 16-17% CAGR that we've delivered is a very healthy growth, even compared to most industries. But I'm saying if we want to look at this as a higher growth business, then somewhere we will also may have to consciously take a call of saying that, look, let's not kill ROCE, but is it worth diluting for a bit to be able to be moved to a faster growth? And I think these are not easy questions for sure. These are tough choices. And today I don't think we have a simple, clear answer for you. But I think we are very cognizant and cautious of making sure that we are not killing financial ratios in an attempt only for growth. But we will balance a lot of these thoughts and KPIs before we make whatever decision we do. And I think it's difficult to give a straight guidance at this point of time because the industry is also moving and changing very quickly. And if we continue to only look at ROCE as the main KPI, we may land up losing many larger, bigger, exciting opportunities for the company from a strategic long-term perspective. So I think we'll have to have more facets to that lens than only one.
So in that case, what my thought would be that, then you set out these kind of parameters so investors can know what to expect. You say that, okay, fine, 35% is high. Then you say, what am I going to target? And then what corresponding growth am I going to target corresponding to that? So that, it's a very clear signal to the market because we always have options of growing organically as well. These kind of valuations that we are paying, the latest acquisition was you've not given us the numbers or the payout or the payback, or you have not given us any indication of that. So then, we have seen in the market, we have seen many companies which have malallocated capital because the capital was freely available. And then the financial ratios of the company deteriorated over a period of time, and so did the stock price. And then, so ultimately, it's the articulation of the strategy. So then the investors know what to expect. Suppose you say, okay, only 20% I'm going to do ROC, but I'm going to grow at 35%. So then we know what to expect. As of now, everything is in a very nebulous area. So we have no idea on what the management is really kind of trying to achieve in the longer term.
No, I think it's a very fair point, and I think we've been very transparent and communicative, I think, about all parts of our strategy. We'd be happy to give you guys a guidance on the capital allocation strategy in more detail. So I think we'll come back to you on that with a very specific guidance that you're asking for. But I think you will.
So now your market cap is no longer in the. We are not playing in the baby leagues here. We are in a $2.5 billion kind of a market cap range now, right? And we want to go into the bigger leagues as time goes by. So then automatically, the communication and the articulation of the strategy has to be very pinpointed. We cannot then kind of, everything is hanging around in the cloud. Nowadays, that cloud is a very fashionable term, but as far as investors are concerned, cloud becomes very, very cloudy, and we want the sunlight, so just a kind of a thought process that maybe you can evaluate.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my points are done. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the last question. We will now close the question queue. I would like to hand the floor back to Ms. Ameera. Please go ahead.
So thanks everyone for joining us today. I think, as I mentioned earlier, we are very much at an inflection point, and there are a lot of big questions coming up. As mentioned, there are going to be a lot of choices to be made. I think history has shown that we've been quite careful when we make our choices and conscious, and we will continue to do the same as we move into the future. While things may not be apparently completely pinpointedly clear in the short term, we believe that we will get there in the next few months and be able to share with you a lot more in detail our thoughts and plans, some of which we may or may not be able to share at this point. But we do believe that there is an exciting opportunity not only from an organic perspective, an inorganic perspective, and a digital perspective. And we are continuing to evaluate all these opportunities as we look forward. So thanks to all of you, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Edelweiss Financial, that concludes this conference. Thank you for joining us, and you may now disconnect your lines. Thank you.